July the 4th date for a second. That is by 4 days, the second half of the year. Some people will say he was playing slightly fast and loose with the meaning of words in that context. And as you say, it's not an amazing look to have as your underlying reason the fear that quite a lot could go wrong between now and, as I say, the original planned date of the middle of November. But you will remember that only a couple of weeks ago he announced his big themes for the election, and they were essentially around the idea that this is a highly uncertain world, that we face these massive threats to our security from Russia, the conflagration in the Middle East, the threat of China, also massive economic disruption, this industrial revolution from artificial intelligence. And he is setting himself up as somebody with the experience to guide the nation through all of this. Now, the opinion polls at the moment show that the British people don't have an enormous amount of confidence in his ability to deal with these great challenges, and they are very great challenges, but that will be his theme, and these threats are real.
We assume that he is, I feel like the sun is about to come out here. We take our umbrellas down in a minute, it must be a sign. We assume that the Tories are prepared. I mean, they're the ones who called the election. How prepared do you think Labour are, and other parties like Reform? I mean, one of the arguments for going now, I would guess, is that, you know, Reform haven't had much time to organise. How prepared do you reckon the other parties in the round are?
So Labour has been prepared for the campaign for months and months. I mean, they were rather hoping for a May general election. There's a separate issue, which we'll doubtless talk about in the weeks ahead, about how prepared they are for the challenge of government itself, but they are prepared. They've got a slick campaigning operation. They are prepared. You know, obviously the Prime Minister hopes that Reform isn't quite there yet, because one of the big threats to his ability to claw back the gap with Labour is if Reform continues to take votes from him. I'll tell you the group of people, though, who are not ready. You have to assume that CCHQ, the campaigning heart of the Tory party, is ready. Tory MPs are in shock. Ever since it was about lunchtime that I confirmed that he was likely to announce a July the 4th general election, I've been ringing around Tory MPs, and the general reaction was, what? Jaws dropped. Oh my goodness. And they are actually quite terrified because they're not ready. They are currently looking at what's happening in their constituencies, and they think they need longer to see off the threat, particularly from Labour, but also from the Lib Dems. You know, it wasn't that long ago that I thought there was a risk that if he flagged an intention to go for an early election, they would try and stop him. Actually, he's kept it unbelievably quiet. Everybody thought it was going to be the latter part of the year. He'll go to the palace. I assume the King will grant his wish to hold an election. At that point, even if Tory MPs want to stop him, they can't now. It will be a done deal.
If you're just tuning into this at home, we should point out that you've probably had better things to do with your life than spend the day on social media. It's been a day of feverish speculation about what's going on. I've seen it reported there are lots of letters in from Tory MPs calling for his resignation. I mean, I assume that's not going anywhere. It can't go anywhere. Yeah, it's kind of nonsense.
I mean, I've talked to some of the rebels. You know, as I say, they don't like it, but they can't see how to stop it. And let's be absolutely clear, the King is going to assume that the majority of Tory MPs will go along with this, that Labour wants a general election, that essentially there's a majority in Parliament for a general election. The King is not going to stop a general election because a few Tory MPs don't want it. At that point, Tory MPs would be clinically insane to put in enough letters for a leadership election. Imagine going into a general election and also simultaneously having to have a leadership election. So even though you have to say there are some MPs who are, to use a technical phrase, slightly bonkers, I don't think they're that bonkers.
We won't dwell on all the time we spent standing in the street for Liz Truss and then not Liz Truss and all the rest of it. We are expecting the Prime Minister presumably to come out of number 11. I don't know why that door's open, but if you're standing here looking at this, the expectation is, they've had a cabinet meeting, the expectation is that the Prime Minister is going to come out, he's going to address us fairly soon. Now, Robert was just talking about the mood in the Conservative Party there, surprise, some shock. Anushka is in the Houses of Parliament. Anushka, what is the mood with you?
Well, no MP who I spoke to thought this was going to happen this morning. And as Robert said, quite a few of them are very upset about it. They do not feel ready to go to an election. I've spoken to ones on the One Nation, the more liberal side of the party, who are saying to me, we're actually not ready on the ground. We're not ready to go. I've spoken to some on the right wing of the party who have long said that they did not like the threat, as they saw it, of an early election. You know, this date has been around a bit in the past. Actually, back in April, we talked about a very senior figure in Downing Street suggesting to the Prime Minister for the first time, how about not going long? How about going for a July the 4th election? The argument being that the reform threat was only going to get more and more. When we wrote about that, I should say Downing Street denied it at the time, but we had good sourcing, so we wrote about it. I started getting messages from Conservative MPs saying they are just trying to threaten us. We need to stand firm against this, and they are very upset tonight. But, you know, they know that they have to do it. They know they have to go forward to it. Many of those MPs are actually leaving here. The question is, do they feel ready? I just spoke to one MP who said there was a group of them in Downing Street this morning discussing manifesto ideas. And it didn't feel like they were absolutely going for it, ready with a manifesto. You know, I also spoke to some very senior figures around the Prime Minister this morning who, it seemed to me, did not know that this was coming. It feels to me that this has very much come from the Prime Minister and some very close aides, and he's taken that decision that perhaps this is the best moment for them, that inflation target has been hit. Some suggesting he's actually not that convinced about Rwanda. He's worried that the policy will get caught up in the courts, and perhaps it is better to say we're going for an election and we're going to promise something even tougher on the other side. Certainly Tory MPs will be pushing for some in the party for very tough stuff like a threat to leave the European Convention on Human Rights to be in the manifesto, but there are others in the party who won't want that.
Okay, well, let's go very briefly. As you can see, we think it's only a short time now until the Prime Minister's due out. But let's go to Libby Wiener, who was with the Prime Minister this morning. Libby, what was his mood this morning?
Well, I have to say, Tom, he was quite distracted. And normally there's a bit of a small talk before you do the interview. There was none of that today. I did actually ask him whether the inflation figure, that is getting it down to 2.3% within the Bank of England's target range, would tempt him to call a general election. And interestingly, he did say, although he kept saying it was still going to be in the second half of this year, he did say that this shows that people can trust him and can trust the Conservative Party. And that sounded to me like he was almost formulating an election slogan as we spoke. He clearly is very focused on the economy, and there is talk that this 2.3% may be the bottom for some time, and inflation could edge up a little bit more. So it does look very much like he's taken this, seized the moment, as it were, and decided that this is the best it's going to get for some time. In addition, as Anushka was saying, there is the issue of that Rwanda policy, not just the question of it getting bogged down in the courts, but also the fact that despite appearances of the weather today, it is summer and the weather is going to warm up further. It is going to get hotter, and all the signs are that when the weather is good, the channel crossings increase, the numbers increase. And while he might get some people on a plane to Rwanda, the spectacle of more and more people coming ashore, despite that, I think would be hugely difficult to explain to the electorate. So I think there are several reasons why he has decided that this is the moment, albeit he is still well behind in the polls.
Okay, Libby, thank you very much indeed. Well, Robert, let's come back to you as we wait for the Prime Minister to come out here. Going to be quite a short, sharp campaign. I mean, obviously election campaigns are usually the same timescale, but we haven't had the kind of lead-up we might have had if it was in November, where we'd have spent all of September and October speculating. We assume there'll be TV debates, I'm imagining. I mean, we haven't heard much talk about those, but are those...
Rishi Sunak is desperate to have TV debates. We haven't yet had confirmation from Keir Starmer whether he wants them. I'm assuming he'll agree to the ITV debate, the only one worth watching.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there will be TV debates, I confidently predict. Well, we have had a bit of a run-up. I mean, if you remember, it was only last week that I was in Essex with Keir Starmer launching his pledges for the general election. Now, I have to say, Labour at that point assumed those were pledges that they would campaign on all the way to the autumn. That is what they explicitly said to me. They are now the pledges that they will be shouting about for the next 6 weeks. Now, they said to me, there's going to be more in their manifesto when it comes out, and I have to say many people would say there blooming well better be more, because actually, they were not the most ambitious promises any of us have ever seen.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer would say, here's the podium coming out. Keir Starmer would say the reason they're not that ambitious is because he believes the electorate has lost confidence in politicians over the last few years. Politicians promising much and delivering not that much, and therefore he's concentrating, he would say, on policies, programs that he believes he can deliver relatively quickly. But the challenges we face as a nation, very low growth, extraordinary levels of poverty, children in poverty still at record levels, for example. A burning need to get the growth rate economy, at least growth in living standards, back to somewhere close to where it was before the crash, because we shouldn't be under any illusion. We haven't seen a significant rise in living standards since 2008. It's an awfully long time of stagnation. So huge challenges that a new government inherits, including a debt burden that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves says doesn't afford them much room to improve public services.
Great election campaigns, as we know, are usually snappy, simple, quite often emotive, revolves around time for a change, stick with what you know and all the rest of it. Is what we heard from Sunak the other day going to be it, do you think? Stick with me in an uncertain world? And is the Labour message as simple as you hunger for change, now's the time? How do you think they pitch it?
Look, the backdrop, and Rishi Sunak can't be under any illusion about this, is that the mood of the majority of British people, all the polls show, is that they